Riddle me this. I can use creation tools that can allow you to record and edit your podcast from your phones and computers. I can distribute your podcast so it can be heard on all the major listening platforms such as Spotify and Apple Music. I can make you some money, no strings attached. I'm free as a bird. I'm something you raise on a ship besides a sail. Who am I? That is correct. Anchor, baby. For more information, visit anchor.fm today.
Greetings, fellow investigators. Special Agent Spooky Clutter here. Have you ever had a craving for a nice, refreshing energy drink, but you don't want the annoying sugar crash that comes with it? Well, you're not alone, and I've got a great alternative that's bound to get your attention. I'd like to introduce you to Raze Energy. Raze Energy is one of the best energy drinks on the market today. Unlike other main brand energy drinks, Raze has no sugar crashes and zero sugar. It's a great drink for getting that boost you need, whether you're going to the gym or conducting cinema investigations like myself and Special Agent Carter Sauce. So, if I got your attention with that, then do yourself a favor and go to repsports.com and try it out. When you get to checkout, use code CFiles for a great discount. And we here at the C-Files would like to thank Raze Energy and Rep Sports for sponsoring the podcast, as well as the Slash and Cast Podcast Network. With that all being said, enjoy today's episode, and until next time, my fellow investigators, remember, the entertainment is out there.
You're listening to the C-Files RetroAthon. In Season 1, they investigated some of the greatest horror and sci-fi that cinema has to offer. Now, they're taking you to the classics that started it all. From the mystical performance of Bela Lugosi in Dracula, to the terrifying analogy of the dangers of nuclear weapons in Godzilla. Join the special agents of the CBI in the C-Files RetroAthon. Brought to you by the Slash and Cast Podcast Network. Now, here are your hosts, Special Agents Spooky Clutter and Carter Sauce.
Greetings, fellow investigators. Welcome back to the C-Files RetroAthon. I'm Special Agent Spooky Clutter.
I'm Special Agent Carter Sauce.
And today, we are going to be reviewing The Invisible Man from 1933. And I gotta say, it's good to be back. I had to take a little bit of a long weekend, if you will. Had some family business to take care of, but guess what? I'm back. And we're back. And I'm really excited to get into this film. This movie has a really interesting history. It was first a novel by H.G. Wells, and then it was adapted into a movie. And the director is James Whale, who, for all you film enthusiasts, you know that James Whale also directed Frankenstein that we reviewed. So make sure you guys check that out if you haven't already. So let's get into this. First off, Claude Rains is the lead as Jack Griffin, a.k.a. the Invisible Man. The basic gist of the story is that Dr. Jack Griffin was working on a formula to basically become invisible. He's worked 5 years on it, and he finally was able to succeed. The problem is, though, is that he hasn't been able to revert back to a visible man. So throughout the entire film, he's on a huge quest to essentially turn visible again. The movie opens up where Jack is walking through the snow to this town called Iping. It's somewhere in Europe or the UK. And he comes up to this tavern called the Lion's Head. And the first shot we get of him, where it's like a zoom-in close shot, it is fantastic. He's wearing these spooky-looking goggles. He's got bandages wrapped around his head. He's wearing this very stylish fedora. And you just get this certain eke of menace about him. Like, when you zoom in on his face, there's just something menacing about him. And Claude Rains just does a beautiful job. He steals the show.
I just like how in a movie that everyone is just minding their own business, and then the door opens up and there's this random person they don't know, and everything is just so quiet, and they're always nosy. I'm like, okay, seriously, what? Do I look like a fucking train wreck to you? Come on. I'm just here just minding my own business. Why y'all look at me as if I'd shot someone?
And you know, it's funny because the Lion's Head Tavern reminds me of the Slaughtered Lamb from American Werewolf in London. And I got that vibe because in American Werewolf in London, you had the two characters, and I can't remember their names. Somebody's going to kick me in the butt for that. But anyway, so the two American tourists, if you will, come to the slaughtered lamb, and everybody's minding their own business, doing their own thing. And then all of a sudden, these two strangers come in, and everybody's quiet and staring at them. Well, that's what happens here. And you could say that it's actually justified because you have this really unusual-looking stranger popping up, and it's like he's wearing this hat, his whole face is bandaged up. It's all just really, really unusual. So he is kind of psychotic throughout the entire film. He's crazy. He's very crazy.
He is basically, in the words of the Mad Hatter, he's out of his flippin' mind.
No arguments there.
My thoughts exactly. Basically, this guy, it's like he just ate so much, it's like he just sniffs mercury fumes for a rush or something, just like that.
Right. So last time we were here, we watched The Ghoul. We watched and reviewed The Ghoul. And we came across a cheerful little character named Caney. And we told you that we would make this a regular thing, that every time we watched a movie, we would be on the lookout for another Caney. And folks, we found another Caney. And I gotta say, this Caney is more psychotic than the first one. So the character we're referring to is Jenny Hall, who was the wife of the owner of the Lion's Head Tavern. She's played by Una O'Connor, and this chick is just insane. She screeches like a bat, and she's batshit crazy. And she almost looks like a witch sometimes because she has kind of like this crooked nose just a little bit. And then she has this pompadour haircut, which looks funny as well. But throughout the entire first act of the film, all she did was scream like a bitch. And holy crap, if this isn't the quintessential Caney, like the daughter of the original Caney, I don't know what is, because she is just crazy. Absolutely crazy.
I have to say that not only is she a Caney, she's very, very obnoxious. She's like, oh, you like a room, sir? Stuff like, you like a room, sir? Oh, sorry, I forgot the mustard. She's always knocked. She just waltz in as if she owns the place. Oh, wait, so that joke is invalid because she basically owns the place and he's renting it out, though. So she just barges in willy-nilly, and she has no respects for the customers. Like I told you not to disturb me, shit like that. And come on, son, at least if you're going to be courteous to your customers, at least respect their wishes. If they wish to be left alone, then leave them the fuck alone. If they request you to give them lunch at a certain time, then do what they said, though. Okay? It's not rocket science. Come on. And the fact that you scream at every little fucking thing, that, oh my god, there's a stain on the rug. Oh my god, he's doing something in here with these chemicals. I think he could be a drug dealer or cooking something. I don't know what he's doing though, but for the love of God, you ever heard the phrase, you know what happens, you don't want to stick your nose, don't stick your nose where it shouldn't be, because if you do, it's going to get cut off though.
Yeah, the idea that the Invisible Man's a drug dealer is kind of funny, because he has all these unusual testing tubes and all the quintessential mad scientist technology in this room. And of course, apparently he hasn't been paying his rent. And that's where it really starts going downhill for this guy, the Invisible Man. Because he hasn't paid rent, he's been kind of creepy, and he's creeping out all of the patrons of the Lion's Head Tavern. And so the rent is due, and he doesn't have the money to pay the rent. So he actually physically assaults the Lion's Head owner, and so they call in the cops, and you have this cop come in, and this guy is so funny because the people are trying to explain to him why this guy's all creepy, and he makes this sound twice. He's like, oh, and he gives this funny ass face too, and he has this mustache, so that's also funny. And this is like the old time police officer outfits. I believe they call them bobbies.
Yeah,
right?
Instead they didn't have guns; they had billy clubs, or nightclubs, as we would call them, nightsticks.
Right. So this guy is walking around, he's like, oh, and every time somebody says something, he's like, oh, and it's really funny. But then they get to corner the Invisible Man, and the dude, Mr. Jack Griffin or Dr. Jack Griffin, he starts getting butt ass naked, which is hilarious when you think about it. But because he's completely invisible, he can't wear any clothes because the clothes aren't invisible with him. So he gets naked, and for the next, I want to say maybe 3 to 5 minutes, they're just trying to surround him and make sure he doesn't leave. And basically, it's the police officer and like 3 or 4 guys behind him that they try and corner Jack. And he's completely invisible. He's naked and invisible. And he owns these guys. He completely owns these guys. He almost kills the police officer. And then he takes out the other guys and he escapes. So now the Invisible Man is on the loose. And everybody at the tavern is trying to convince everybody else that wasn't there that there is an Invisible Man. And the general consensus for the news and for the rest of the media is that it was all a giant hoax. Of course, later on in the film, everybody realizes, no, it's not a hoax, because the chief of police comes down and starts questioning all the witnesses that supposedly saw the Invisible Man, and he thinks everybody's crazy until the Invisible Man shows up and literally strangles him to death. So now you have an entire manhunt of everybody trying to catch the Invisible Man, and they go through these different processes of trying to corner him, trying to use nets to like corner him and make sure he doesn't escape. And it's really amusing to watch.
It's very amusing indeed, though. It's like, I thought it was going to be like a horror movie, but it's actually like there's bits of horror, bits of suspense and horror in there, and there's like a bunch of slapstick in there, because before the cop tried to arrest Dr. Jack Griffin, he's basically stripping of his clothes, and he's like, "Oh, you wanna play hardball? I'll play hardball. Let's see how tough you could. Let's see if you could catch me. I'm like the wind, baby." And so he's basically, they're doing like a chase, like a ring around the rosy type chase thing, while he's taking off his shirt and everything. He's pushing people, he's stealing bikes, he's hitting people with brooms, he's throwing rocks at windows, he's knocking hats off of people, and he's just being a complete straight up menace, though, like a hooligan.
What's funny is that this movie, like Carter said, is supposed to be like a sci-fi, somewhat type horror film, and you get those elements. I mean, you have some of the shots where he's the camera's clearly panned on him, but you can't see him because he's invisible. But he kills quite a few people. He even derails several trains. He robs a bank. This guy is like a poltergeist. And it has some scary moments, but overall, this movie is like a comedy, because Claude Rains does this crazy maniac laugh, and it's just hilarious to hear. He's like, "Oh!" And he's just freaking everybody out, and he's like a ghost. And because, he's invisible, nobody can see him. He's wearing a shirt, and it's like there's no hands, there's no body attached to the shirt, so it's almost like a ghost. And this movie just had so many funny moments that I can't necessarily classify this as not a comedy. I don't think that they label it as a comedy. It's like a science fiction horror film, but there's not so much horror as there is comedy. There's plenty of sci-fi, because obviously the whole invisible aspect is sci-fi, but comedy, yes. If you want to have somebody laugh at like an annoying character, another Caney, right? Or you want to laugh at the fact that the Invisible Man is just making complete fools out of the police, it is really funny. And when he escapes the tavern, he goes to the house of one Dr. Arthur Kemp, who was a friend of his, a colleague, before he went all invisible. So basically, Dr. Jack Griffin threatens Kemp into working with him. And later on in the film, basically, Kemp narcs on him. And so, as the Invisible Man escapes, he basically threatens Kemp, saying, "By tomorrow night at 10 o'clock, I'm going to kill you." Which he does, by the way. And it's really interesting how it all happened. And the whole climax of the film is really funny, too, because after Jack kills Kemp by essentially tying him up, putting him in his car, and then having the car drive off the cliff, which was a really intense scene, by the way. The car just starts tumbling, and then it lights on fire, then it explodes. And talk about overkill. But it was hilarious seeing. So Jack goes into the wilderness, and he finds this, it's a wood shed, if you will, or like a wood barn. And he sleeps in a bunch of hay, and he's like, this is comfortable. And just a quick side note, this guy is naked, and he's hiding in a barrel of hay. It's cold outside. He's like, this is comfortable. It's like, dude, there's no fire. There's definitely no heater, no air conditioning, and you're saying it's comfortable? Okay, I mean, I've never slept in a barn before, but I guess the barn animals never complained about it, so...
And the part that you're sleeping in hay. You're sleeping in hay. Take it from me though, because I've messed around with hay before. I've touched it. I've fed it to horses, and trust me, that stuff gets everywhere, and sometimes it's a little itchy.
A little itchy, right? So the climax of the film has it to where when he's sleeping in the barn, the owner of the barn shows up, and he's completely oblivious. He just turns in his tools, and then he starts hearing snoring. And it's like, he looks around and he's like, what the hell is that? And he goes to the hay and he realizes that there's somebody sleeping in there. Of course, because the media has hyped up the Invisible Man so much and he starts poking at the hay with his stick, he realizes the Invisible Man is sleeping in the barn. But here's the weird thing, though. When the guy first comes in, the door opening and closing is pretty loud, and I'm surprised that Jack didn't hear it, because he's been very careful about pretty much everything else. But he didn't hear the barn door open and close. So it was a little strange, but the climax of the film has it to where the guy, as in the owner of the barn, goes to the police. The police surround the barn. It's also snowing, so he won't be able to stay hidden for long as people keep track of his feet in the snow. So they surround the barn, they light the barn on fire to flush him out, and then he walks out, or he barges out of the barn because obviously it's on fire, he can't breathe. So he starts going towards the cops. The cops are all surrounding him, and one of the cops shoots him. He shoots him like, what, 2 or 3 times?
He fires off 3 rounds. The first round is the advance, and the second and third time was to put him down. And basically, which is weird though, because how the hell do you know where he is though? And it's a little weird though that you know where he is though, and you just fire off shots though, and you don't even know where they're going though. It would have been interesting if they had like a whole firing squad, just like, oh, in case he comes this way, shoot him or shoot him.
Yeah, exactly. And of course, he gets shot twice, and that's basically how he dies. He doesn't die immediately right there, but again, it's one of those things where it's anticlimactic. Every film we've reviewed so far in this RetroAthon, with the exception of King Kong, I would say, has been an anticlimactic ending. Everything just had a huge amount of momentum running forward, and then it just has a sudden death stop. And then it's like, oh yeah, end credits, it's a universal picture. And that's what it said at the end of this film, too. So, he doesn't die right away in the snow. They bring him back to the hospital, and it turns out he's dying because of the 2 shots that punctured both his lungs. So he's dying, and according to the doctor, he said that the effects of the drugs and chemicals that Griffin used to become invisible will wear off as he dies. Which is weird, though, because that really makes no sense. How is it that the chemicals just wear off after he dies? It's kind of like a weird little plot hole that I don't really understand. So then he talks to this girl named Flora, who is the love interest, if you will. We don't see her too much. We see her in the beginning of the film. We see her in the middle where she talks to Jack, and they have this little romance thing, but there's not a lot of romance built up compared to the other films we've seen. So she shows up, and they have like a nice little touching moment, and then we see Jack die, and he becomes visible again. And I gotta say, the special effects on this shot and all the other shots as well, where Jack's invisible, are practically top-notch, especially for 1933. You could tell that they use a type of green screen effects, and you can tell when you see the effects, but they had some very creepy moments where he's invisible, and it is iconic in its own right.
Yeah, like example, like if the Invisible Man is near a door, he could open a door, close a door, or sit on a rocking chair, and you could see the imprint of a butt on a chair, or him picking up like a cigarette, or stuff like that, Joe. Just any objects that are inside that could be floating, that look like they're floating but they're not. That it's very clever though. It's very practical CGI back, or green screen back in the days, and I admire that. And if now there's another cameo in there that I think you would like to know about.
So I told you guys earlier that the director of this film, James Whale, did Frankenstein. Well, a nice, familiar actor from the Universal catalog made a sneaky little appearance, that being Dwight Frye. You guys remember him from Dracula as Renfield, and he was also the Hunchback in Frankenstein. And Dwight Frye comes back, and he's a random reporter. He's not even a main character, but he sneaks in there. And when we watched the film, I'm the first one who spotted it. I was like, oh my God, is that Dwight Frye? And it is. He was wearing glasses, he had on this fancy hat, and he's just some random reporter guy. And I'm like, my God, we have 2 Frankenstein connections in this film. So I thought that was really nice that they brought in Dwight Frye again. And I am curious to know if it was actually James Whale who wanted to bring him in because, they were together on Frankenstein. So it's kind of like a nice little reunion. Of course, Dwight Frye has a small part, and he doesn't do very much, but just seeing him in that role is really interesting. And it kind of reminds me of the Stan Lee cameos. It's like if we have more Universal monster movies going forward in this RetroAthon, and we see Dwight Frye, I'm going to refer to the Dwight Frye cameos like you would do with the Stan Lee cameos, because that's really what it feels like. Dwight Frye was there for 1931 in Dracula. He came back again in Frankenstein, and I think we will be seeing him again in more Universal pictures going forward, and I'm very excited to point those out. So overall, I'd say that this movie is top-notch, 10 out of 10. The sci-fi aspect is really cool. It's a very simple story. There's not too much detail necessarily. We don't get a description of all the chemicals that were used to make him invisible. We do get one of them. It was called Monocane, I believe. And the way they explained it was that it was some kind of flower that came from India that basically turned things white, kind of like bleach. And then it also had an effect on the mind where it's kind of like it made you mad, which would explain why the Invisible Man is essentially a psychopath. So we get that explanation, but we don't get the explanation for the other chemicals that he used. The only thing we get is that for 5 years he was working on this experiment, and he finally succeeded in making himself invisible, but in the end he couldn't turn himself uninvisible. And again, that's what this whole film was about, trying to make him invisible or visible again. And of course, he fails, but he ends up becoming invisible anyway when he dies, which is really weird. But overall, the camera work also was fantastic. I know that in our earlier reviews, we praised Dean Cundey, and I think Dean Cundey is like one of my favorite cinematographers because he's just that good. And this film had some really good camera shots, and you had a lot of good panning and zooming in. It was really nice. And this was in 1933, and the camera work has really improved from the last time we talked on The Mummy. And it's just awesome to see how the special effects, the cinematography, the music, there's a lot more music in this film too. We're starting to see more of the modern things we would expect in films to crop up. And it's really awesome to see the transition and evolution of film, and it's just really good.
Also, that not only did The Invisible Man, there's actually been 4 sequels. There's actually 4 sequels and 1 reboot. One of them is being The Invisible Man Returns, The Invisible Woman, Invisible Agent, The Invisible Man's Revenge, Abbott and Costello Meet the Invisible Man, and the 2020 adaptation of The Invisible Man, which doesn't hold a candle to the original, because the original, you had chemicals, while in the 2020 version, spoiler alert, has a guy that builds an invisible suit, not chemicals, which is very interesting, but doesn't hold a candle.
Yeah, comparing this film to the remake that came out in, 2019 or 2020?
Last year, 2020.
2020. Yeah, the 2021 was decent, and it was very suspenseful. This film wasn't really suspenseful, but I enjoy this film more than the remake. I think that the original just has that classic feel to it, and it has a good list of actors. And I love Claude Rains. I've seen him in The Wolfman, and that's what I mainly remember him for, and he's just fantastic. His voice is really good, too. It reminds me a lot of Bela Lugosi and Boris Karloff, because all 3 of these guys have these intoxicating voices, like these fantastic voices that kind of put you into a trance. And Claude Rains does a fantastic job. I really enjoy his performance. He can go from being calm, cool, and collected to being a complete maniac, and that's just fantastic. So as we begin to wrap things up here, Carter, what is something that caught your attention about this film overall?
Well, I have to say the wardrobe or the costume designs. The first time we see him all wrapped up in like this bandages and then these weird goggles and this fedora and this long coat. Like, and some people think that, oh my god, he's so weird. Why is he dressed up like that? Wouldn't you have noticed? It's freezing cold outside, and wouldn't you wear a shitload of clothing if it was that cold? I know I would. Don't you look at me like that. And I like that. I like those glasses. I like those fucking glasses. Those glasses are really cool. Like the ones that have like on the side. The weird thing about those glasses though is that they're very small on me, and I have like a big face, and they wouldn't fit me unless my face was completely bandaged, and just the way they fit though. And I just think that the outfits are really good though, really good for 30 standards.
Yeah, I have to agree. The outfit for the Invisible Man with the bandages and the glasses and the hat really have an intimidating factor. And I know I said this before, but I'll say it again, that opening shot where we see the Invisible Man walk into the tavern is just iconic. It's one of those iconic shots. And if you think about it and you watch that scene, it's very similar to the other shots we got from Dracula, Frankenstein, and the Mummy, where the camera would focus only on the character's face. And of course, we can't see the Invisible Man's eyes, but you can imagine it. You can imagine how in the previous films we reviewed, where the faces of the monsters would get a close-up shot, we get that once again. And I'm glad that they continue that, because it's really good, and it's very intimidating. I also, once again, love Claude Rains, and we have to mention it once again, it's Caney. Remember that, folks. Caney is back once again.
Totally. I can't stand a Caney. If you remember who Caney is, good for you. If you don't, then go listen to our other review. Then you'll know.
Right. So Una O'Connor as Jenny Hall is our Caney of the film. We'll point that out at the end of every episode. I think we can do that from now on. That we'll make sure that we find our Caney, and we'll announce it once again at the end of the episode as a nice little joke. And don't get me wrong, we're not trying to insult the actress who played Caney in The Ghoul. It was just it's just a little thing for fun, because the character was so badly written, and the performance for that badly written character was hilarious. So going forward, now you understand why we refer to any bad female character as a Caney, because it's just those annoying qualities. And this time, this version of Caney was just loud as hell. She screamed all the time. So that's our Caney of the movie.
I just like how that what was the actor's name who played the Invisible Man again? I forgot.
Claude Rains.
Yeah, I like how Claude Rains, he plays this psychopathic role. When he's invisible, he's doing these nursery rhymes and causing mischief. Like, it was like these nursery rhymes like Pop Goes the Weasel and Collecting Nuts in May. It's just, what the hell?
Yeah, it is pretty creepy. So thank you guys very much for tuning in again. It's been really fun, and I'm glad to be back once again. And this movie is just, I love this movie. This movie is one of the classics. It's one of the greats. So with that all being said, thank you guys very much for listening. And until next time, our fellow investigators, remember,
the entertainment is out there.